levels. Our job was to push over the levels and the thresholds to see where those limits were. And we have to do that physically. And I think when you put firearms and weapons handling, that's why blue guns, airsoft, paint, it's so good, because you can go to a point of exhaustion where you are going over that line and you're finding that line without putting yourself in an unsafe scenario.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. Our informational content cannot address all dangerous situations and cannot guarantee your survival or prevent injuries when the unexpected happens. The decision to carry a firearm, either for recreation or for personal defense, carries the risk and potential for injury and/or death. Therefore, it is advised that you seek out and acquire proper training before using a firearm or any firearm-related product.
What are some self-defense techniques?
What would happen if there was a global internet outage?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend?
Is there anything I could do?
All right, guys, welcome back to Dangerous Questions, an Ironclad original. This episode, we're talking about tactical fitness. There's so many different things that we're preparing for in life, and throughout my experience in my career, my profession, even still to this day, I always talk about functional fitness, training for reality, the everyday scenarios that we're gonna face. And even as a father, it's very simple to see why fitness is important, because I wanna be able to have the ability to show up for my family, my children, in a life-threatening scenario. So a lot of these questions have been building up, and we want to bring you guys that level of experience and knowledge and some of the feedback that I have on some of these questions. So let's get right into it on the first question. How do you prepare physically for a multi-domain environment where you're required to transition between land, water, or urban terrain during an operation? Okay, so this is the reality of what we did when we were going on target, when we went after bad guys, when we went overseas, right? We could be anywhere from jumping out of a plane, going into the water, climbing over to the beach, and kicking a door down. So that adaptability and that transition, that adaptation that you need to do to each environment, there's always a feeling that I get and a level of intentionality that I get when I go through these things, because it's hard and it's difficult to do that. When you're sitting there swimming for however long it is, that's why triathlons are so good, and that's why all these multi-disciplines, when you're jumping on a bike and then you hit the pavement, or you hit the pavement and you're jumping in the water, they're so good for you, both physically and mentally, because you have to work through different parts of your body that are adapting. I mean, our bodies are capable of so much, but you don't know that until you push yourself. So the biggest way to do this is to actually do it, to train, to go through those environments. But when you're transitioning those environments, there's a feeling that I get of really wanting to push myself right on the transition, because it's often what can make or break you either winning an event or surviving. And I think when you shift gears, when you say, hey, I just ran, a mile, and now I need to kick a door down, and I'm out of breath, and I'm thinking differently, and I'm not prepared to walk in there, that's the transition where you can get the rep in to be like, no matter what happens, I have to respond to the best of my ability to bring every fiber of my being through that front door, or every fiber of my being to get in the water. Say if I have to sprint to the beach to save somebody that's drowning. Well, I just sprinted, did everything I could to get there because their life is in danger. Now I have to swim after having sprinted. So the reality of this is very, very, very real to everybody here. To transition from multiple disciplines and to go from one thing to the next, I think is extremely important. You can do it in the gym. I mean, a simple example would be, we always did 40 calories on the assault bike as fast as you could. We tried to get under a minute. So the next time you're at the gym, or the next time you have an assault bike around, all my armor up people out there know what I'm talking about, is when I put myself under that level of stress, fully physical, and then transition right off of the bike, and I'm not talking about pause or take a deep breath, I'm talking about get off the 40 calories, pick up a blue gun or an airsoft gun or a paint gun or a real gun, and then do your job. Go into the shoot house, have good clean manipulation, take good shot placement, clear the whole building, and do it with 100% precision. No matter how your lungs feel, no matter how you're feeling physically, you have to be able to connect those two things, and it does take repetition. And that really is the culmination of my final answer to this, is that you've got to identify what your X is. What is your goal? What do you want to be great at? If you're working in and around the water and you're expected to be on a boat and then in the water, or in a helo and in the water, or in the water and then on land, you better make sure you have that transition dialed in. Reach a full spectrum of your training, find new areas to push yourself, identify weaknesses, and then get better at it. That's one of the best ways to do it. And really, we can't do it enough. So that's the best way to train at just high levels. But, again, even this episode or multiple episodes before, we talk about Mountain Tough, their ability to really hammer home these transitional aspects, these adaptations that are going to be in your physical fitness. They translate to reality. You being in the gym is one of the best things you can do for your health, your well-being, and your functional connection to the world that you live in. So why not do it as much as you can? All right, next question. What are some of the best exercises to improve mobility and agility in confined spaces such as rooms or hallways during close quarters battle? Okay, I'll pick two things. First is extremely dynamic changes in direction, movements. A lot of, I think of like the New England Patriots or elite athletes, guys like Jeff Nichols and other guys out there that are really trying to put programs together that challenge the dynamic of that movement. So like we're going full speed one way and then going full speed another way. Ladder drills, changing in direction, sprinting one way and then sprinting back the other way, cutting side to side, footwork. Then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, judo type movements where you have to have a very confident and strong base to do it in an unpredictable environment and then be able to change direction while wearing gear or while holding somebody else. That's really where it comes to fruition. And I don't think you can really do those enough. You got to understand your movement and your ability to move so you can cut, change direction, have a good base, and deal with multiple attackers. I mean, really, there's nothing better than just doing that over and over and over again. So if you got to isolate down to, hey, I'm in a gym, well, do ladder drills, do multi-direction drills, do side lunges, do things that are going to help structure your base. We always say, hey, if you want to hit hard, make sure you got a strong base so you can move like a tank. You're grounded at the bottom, and that allows you to manipulate people and do things up top. And I always talk about footwork. It's so important. You're talking about close quarters battle, right? What about at night? It's in a dark place. You got things all over the place. You got to have a strong base and be able to feel your way through your environment confidently, not just sitting there crossing your legs or being imbalanced. So those are a couple things that can help you strengthen that area of discipline. Thank you, Mountain Tough, for sponsoring this episode. If you guys are looking to get in elite shape and great physical condition and boost your overall fitness, you can do it with the Mountain Tough digital training programs. And right now, it's free for 14 days. You can train anywhere you travel with minimal equipment, whether it's in the gym, outdoors, or even at your house. Their app offers expert, progressive plans to build strength, endurance, and resiliency to prevent injury and burnout. They have follow-along coaching videos that will keep you fired up and motivated at every level. Designed for mountain athletes, hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers everywhere. Mountain Tough is led by elite athletes and military veterans. You can start your free trial today and use the code DANGEROUS at checkout for 40% off your annual subscription. These guys are locked on when it comes to elite physical fitness, and it starts from the ground up. Go check them out. All right, next question. How do you integrate weapon handling into your fitness routines to mimic real-world conditions where both strength and accuracy are important? Well, it's a lot like I just talked about the assault bike. Being able to hammer myself and then go into the environment where I'm utilizing those weapons, when I'm getting right into manipulation. I go right into a dry fire drill or some type of weapon manipulation drill where I'm smoked. You think about integrating weapons. This is just I'm sure everybody's probably going to go home and do this, at least all the guys that are fired up. But When I really wanted to test myself with weapons manipulation, stick your hands into a bucket of ice for 5 minutes. And then break your hands out and try to go through all of the manipulation. So it's not that you're completely exhausted, but it's that you have a realistic scenario of what if I was just standing out in the cold and now all of a sudden I have the threat present itself and now I need to go through the manipulation. You are relying on gross motor skill movements where you've lost a lot of the dexterity, right? This is just one way to integrate it. Now, am I doing fitness? We did drills where we were doing cleans, pull-ups, rope pulls, stick our hands in a bucket of ice, and then do the manipulation. So if this is your profession and you want to be really good at this, the closer you can bring those two things together, the better off you're going to be. Nothing is going to replace doing weapons handling in those challenging environments where you can't feel your hands, you're out hunting, you're out pushing yourself in these environments, and then you have to perform. But if we have a controlled environment and we're doing it, I am trying to push myself both from a cardio standpoint, a physical standpoint, and then letting the technique and the manipulation come to full fruition with those movements. And it's like room clearing or anything else. You know, there were times that we did those things where we were dead tired. We wanted to, you know, we were at the brink of exhaustion. We were cold, but we still had to show up and do the work. And I think that's where it solidifies it in the deepest fibers of your being. And like the sinew of your body and your ligaments, they understand that they have to perform regardless of how you feel. So it's almost like when we feel at our lowest points, whether that is right after a workout or we're tired, it's like those are the best opportunities to sharpen that sword and pick up the gun, pick up your firearms. Obviously, I'm saying this, doing it in a safe way, right? You know, we talk about being at the command or doing anything else I did as a SEAL. You know, we find the levels. Our job was to push over the levels and the thresholds to see where those limits were. And we have to do that physically. And I think when you put firearms and weapons handling, that's why blue guns, airsoft, paint, it's so good because you can go to a point of exhaustion where you are going over that line and you're finding that line without putting yourself in an unsafe scenario. You know, and until you're at a SEAL Team 6 level, then don't think that you're going to go do that and do it with a real firearm and do it safely. You know, that should be for pros that are living and breathing that lifestyle. But just from a standpoint of integrating them, I think just doing it in general as much as you possibly can is going to help sharpen that sword and also increase your proficiency with whatever you think you're going to do when a threat presents itself and or that you're under stress. Again, a lot of the stress that we feel in the physical realm is the same exact thing that we're going to deal with when we're ambushed. We just need to do it in this controlled environment as much as we can. And it's uncomfortable, but it will make you better. Great question, fun questions.
What's going on, everybody? I'm Andy Stumpf.
And I'm Mike Glover.
We have a new show. It's called Focal Point. It is an Ironclad original. And on the show, we dive into the issues going on in our culture to look beyond the headlines and the talking head talking points. It's just not everything is as it appears. For a more nuanced perspective on what's actually going on.
These guys are coming in. You have no choice. This is what's going to happen, and clean up the mess.
You can subscribe to Focal Point on YouTube at This Is Ironclad or wherever you get your podcasts.
So the next one that we have is a live caller. I'm super stoked about this because he's got a background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and anybody that really lives that lifestyle, they understand that functional fitness is a part of who they are, and it is really a survivability aspect. It's non-negotiable. When you live in this profession, functional fitness, tactical fitness is a non-negotiable thing. So I'm fired up to see what he has to say and what questions he has, and let's get him up. Nick, welcome to the show, or Chewy, as I see one of your nicknames is.
That's what most people know me as. Yeah, in the jiu-jitsu community, people know me as Chewy.
Right on, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on to the show. You know, we do live calls, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. You have a YouTube channel called Chewjitsu.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So how long have you been doing that for?
I started training fresh out of high school back in 2003. So I started I was graduating high school and started training jiu-jitsu right after wrestling.
What was the spark that got you into this as intense as you are now? What was the major shift for you to take it seriously?
Well, it's like one of those things, right? You're drawn towards something. Sometimes there's like the superficial reason that you're chasing, and then there's deep underlying stuff going on. So the sort of the front end reason was that I wanted to fight mixed martial arts. And so, I wrestled, and so I was like, well, I need to learn how to do the, finish on the ground. And so I wanted to keep competing and I wanted to fight. So that was that. And then the other thing that I didn't really realize until much later was that in wrestling, right, it was the only time as a high schooler I sort of felt like I belonged because, like it was this place where we had all the different kids, the nerdy kids, the cool kids, everybody was coming in, beating the snot out of each other, and it formed a brotherhood within that made us very close knit. And then when wrestling wasn't in season, I felt sort of depressed because I missed it. And then when I got into jiu-jitsu, it's like, oh, it's this thing again. It's this, we're beating the crap out of each other, but there's this mutual respect and this bond that we share. And so I really, even more so as I got older and older and realized how hard it was to find those kinds of places, really relished that part of it.
Yeah, I hear that from a lot of guys, but I also have seen it again and again where you form that brotherhood and that family through that intense training. So yeah. It sparks for a lot of guys. And do you run an academy?
I do, yeah.
You do, and you're out of Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky, yeah.
Louisville, nice.
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of training out there. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. And obviously, we're really focusing in on this episode with tactical fitness. And of course, when you do this type of profession or you teach or coach, you realize how applicable and necessary it is. So what dangerous question did you want to bring to the table today?
Well, so my thing is like your experience, right? So with you, have you done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before? Okay. And how long have you been training in it?
I mean, my whole career, since really 2001. So I was a white belt for a really, really, really long time because it wasn't about the rank for us. We're doing it, in the teams, and it's not like we're focusing on leveling up. We're not doing it in a very traditional sense. But I would say I've been rolling for 20 plus years at this point.
Okay. So I guess maybe it's a different kind of question, but the thing that always interests me. So like when I get people from different walks of life coming into the gym and people that have been training for different reasons, one of the things that I always find interesting is to hear their perspective into how training's affected them or what they've taken from it, right? Because everybody, like I said, comes in for different reasons, or sometimes similar reasons, but what we take out of it is completely different. And then for you, like having the experience that you have with, the military and things like that, what are some things that either the training itself, the fighting itself, or otherwise have you taken from jiu-jitsu?
Well, even from an earlier perspective, before I even got into the military, when I was younger, martial arts were something that I knew were necessary. I knew you needed to be able to defend yourself. And that was the exploration of like, well, what's the best one out there? And that's, of course, when UFC, 1 and 2 and 3 came to fruition and everybody realized right away, like, what's this jiu-jitsu thing? Of course, it took on a whole new shape after that. But it was almost undeniable to know that jiu-jitsu and that ground game, that grappling game was an essential part of the combative element. And I think I've always carried that through. So going into the military and then seeing it firsthand, if you can't control a guy or you can't cuff a guy or you end up on the ground, it was very real to me to know that if I have to face 5 dudes and I end up in a situation where I'm in the street and I'm on the ground, I've got to be able to get back to my feet effectively or be able to manipulate that guy and have some level of control. And without Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you saw the wrestlers that had a wrestling background, they would keep up, but they wouldn't be able to close the deal in a combative environment like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner could. And that was what gained my respect very, very earlier in my career. And when I showed up to SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast, I ended up going to Lynx Academy, which Frank Cucci, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that name, but Frank Cucci, identified a lot of these needs in the standpoint of like, how do we put cuffing, ground game, and combatives all in one place? And I always knew that, you couldn't necessarily in a combative environment just isolate, but I knew the need to be able to increase those skills was to get on the mat more. So I would say that was kind of the base foundation of knowing that you couldn't look away from it. Once you saw Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can't now see the truth of it and then look away. And that's really what it was for me very, very early.
Now with that, because of your experience, right? Like Jiu-Jitsu is one of these things where there's a mixture of it that's incredibly real, incredibly functional, incredibly applicable. But there's also this function of it where, you know, at a certain point, we're all just training in the gym and it's this enjoyable thing that we're having fun with that has a sporting element of it, right? There's a little bit of both there. You know, my estimation is that a lot of times one of the most important things that we get is the ability to deal with stress, having someone really put pressure on us, things like that. Even if the move itself is not applicable to a fight, having someone try to squeeze your friggin' face off is very applicable, and it desensitizes you to that feeling. And if you've never felt that before, it's very, it can be alarming to you the first time it happens. For you, with the experience that you've had, is there anything that you think that you've seen that's been applicable to situations outside of the gym, or if there's anything that stands out to you that's like, this is super applicable, or this has been useful for me outside of the gym in relation to the techniques? Because that's one of the arguments with jiu-jitsu sometimes these days, is that, oh, it's too sporty, it's too this, but there's still so much of it that's very applicable to a real fight or a situation where you have to put hands on someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that first element that you talked about, the desensitization or the repetition that you're getting and being exposed to that level of intensity, that, yes, 100%. For me, when I started jiu-jitsu, it was very much like, oh, we're starting on our knees, we tap hands and we go. Right. And I knew right away that that wasn't right. I knew, now would I still do it today? 100%. I'm not taking anything away from the validity of, you know, starting in those positions. But anybody that doesn't have a combative background, they would come into the gym and be like, oh, this is how we fight. This is the reps that you're getting. But when I apply jiu-jitsu to a real world scenario, I understand that it helps me not get taken down. It helps me understand how to manipulate somebody else to take them down without falling on my face or falling on my back. You know, those are very, very, very useful things to do if I'm having to cuff somebody and I'm in full kit, or I'm on the street right now and I don't want to go to the concrete. You know, that to me was something that was inseparable. I just talked about this on one of the videos, is that when I'm training right now, like if I were to roll with you today, I would never stop thinking about where I could headbutt, gouge, bite, roll, rip, like all those things. Anybody that rolls with me, they know that that's going to happen. And if I've never rolled with that person before, I'm not going to be super intense about it because like, this guy's crazy. But I don't ever want to lose. I don't want to lose sight of like, those are still all options for me. And when you combine the combative with the jiu-jitsu, you get a really, really solid product that's going to be effective in the street. So for me, all of the different submissions, as long as they weren't exposing me in an unnecessary way on my back or in any other element, they would be useful to be able to submit this guy and say, hey, I don't want to kill you, right? Rear naked choke, for example. I mean, I've used that probably more than anything that I can count, because I've been like, okay, this guy's a problem. I don't want to stick a blade in him and I don't want to shoot him, but he needs to go to sleep. I need to neutralize him. He needs to wake up in handcuffs. I mean, I've done that more times than I can count. So the application of how to get there, rear naked is great. We can say, hey, we want to get here all day long, but getting there is the path that real Brazilian technique and repetition and time on the mat helps you crawl to that position and not just think it's going to happen immediately when a guy's fighting for his life. So I think that's what's helped me really open my eyes from a sense of traditional jiu-jitsu, and really the style of it is like, to me, it's human chess. How do I move just a little bit more this way so that I can get a little bit more of an advantage? And in the midst of a battle, with gear or without gear, all of a sudden, you know, whether I got stunned or clipped, somebody's grabbed me, I snap out of it and I'm like, oh, look, I'm in the position that I'm at on the mat all the time. Now all I need to do is go under, grab, change positions, put my foot out, lay the guy down, and now we're right back where I want to be. So I think it's just changing positioning and also submissions that have helped me realize the invaluable nature of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That reminds me of something. There's a really good black belt named Chris Howder, and he says something that's, I really like the saying, and something I resonate with, which is, you know, you can roll sport, but you always think street. So you can roll and do all the sporty stuff you want to, but in the back of your mind, you should always kind of in your mind know what would be a good thing if I was in a fight versus not in a fight. And I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying, roll however you want to, but always know, like, if this was a fight, what would we do? Which pathways would we want to get rid of?
I think for anybody listening to this too, really two different methods of thinking, right? Because if you're a good coach and they're there for self-defense, you have to be able to convey that message really well and clearly, especially if somebody's new and they don't know anything. They're relying on you to help save their life, as opposed to the guy that very specifically knows that you're going into a competition specifically for the technique of jiu-jitsu. I think anybody really underlyingly knows that they're there for some element of self-defense, but I think a good coach is going to help explain that right off the bat. Like, hey, look, just because we're starting from our knees, don't miss the point. You don't do this on the concrete. You know, and you don't want to say that in every single move, but when you're raising somebody up and you've known somebody for years that really says, hey, look, Chewy, you know, I'm really worried. I was in this situation the other day. I was afraid for my life. Help me with this. We're not doing them any service by just saying, hey, get on the mat, you know, and just do these moves because you want to submit somebody. It's got to be connected to reality.
No, what are your thoughts on as far as like when you're training? So like I love jiu-jitsu and obviously it's become a big part of my life, but for me, when someone says that self-defense is their goal, their aim, right? I always encourage them to, you know, obviously jiu-jitsu might be your main thing, you know, your main discipline. But like at my gym, we have boxing and kickboxing. I encourage people to train in those areas because I think striking is important to understand how strikes. You don't have to be an expert striker, but you need to learn how to do it. And then if you're going to train with a weapon, if you're going to own a weapon, you should learn how to train with it and use it on a regular basis. What are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, if someone's doing self-defense, what else should they engage in besides Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or should they just do Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah, so I know you know this because you're in the gym all the time, but there's only ever really anywhere we go, only a handful of guys that really love this life as much as we do. It's always very, very niche group that's like, oh yeah, I want to go get hit in the face and try different techniques. Like it's just not that many. Even in the teams, right? I struggled to pull a handful of guys always in the gym with me. So if somebody listening to this is really serious about this lifestyle like you are, we're seeking that level of training. And so when you say, what else is there? Is this just the discipline? But I think like anywhere else, Chewy, honestly, this is where the doors get closed at 9 o'clock and you invite your buddies in to experiment. And you say, look, Dom knows, you know, blade work. You know, I'm going to pull a guy that works in for counter weapon. Let's grab a guy that's really good at kickboxing and let's experiment here with one thing. You know, what if a guy pulls a blade out on you in the street? What do you do? Well, you put it in the arena, you put it in the mixing pot, and that's how we did all of our training. You know, when it was a question mark, if it wasn't clearly identified, you know exactly what you're doing when somebody, you know, you're going to put somebody in an arm bar. You don't even need to think about it. You already just visualized it 10 times. But now if they have that blade out and they're swinging around and it's a little bit more of a dynamic movement and you're standing up, how do you get to that point? You know, how do I crash in? How do I clear the arm? What are things that we can put in the lab to be able to identify the very gross motor skill movements that we can violently apply and then walk away from? I think that's how anything's really going to be distilled out of those moments. So it's like if somebody's really good at jiu-jitsu, but they're exploring these other things, you really have to find a couple of buddies that you trust and want to train with, and it's really just seeking good knowledge and guidance, and then getting in your garage and training on it, you know, or in the gym when it closes at the end of the day. So.
And then with your military experience, one of the things that I've run into, and this would be more from a perspective, again, to share with other people that might be in the military. You know, when you're training jiu-jitsu, it's not as easy to be consistent as a civilian when you're, you know, being shipped around and moved around when Uncle Sam says you're going here or there or everywhere. So for you, is there anything that you found useful, encouraging, whatever it might be, to stay with jiu-jitsu, even though, like you said, you know, you're a white belt for, you know, X amount of years? Even though you might be training, you just don't have the ability to go through the normal process that civilians would be able to. And I know that I've had military men and women who, you know, there's a bit of frustration there because they've been training for 15 years, but then they get bounced around every 2 years and then they go to the next gym and then they just it's like they're starting over again and they're still a blue belt. So is there any encouragement for you as far as military men and women who are training to stay focused or stay in it, even if you're maybe not moving up the ranks like you would want to?
Yeah, it's all going to be situationally dependent, but the few things that that pop into the top of my head are a good training partner is invaluable, right? Anywhere I go, if I can get that one guy on all my training trips, I had my buddy Lewis. It's like anywhere we go, we had a set of pads. We're gonna hit the pads no matter where we go. Do you have that guy that's willing to get on the hotel carpet with you and keep your reps sharp? I mean, realistically, that's what we did, right?
Whatever you got to do, yeah.
We would beg, borrow, and steal from the people at the hotel to be like, please let us in the ballroom. We just want to use this room for 2 hours, right? Yeah. But you have to be willing to go to that level. And how seriously do you take it? I think if you find that training partner, that's the most effective thing you can do. The second thing is watching video and visualizing is really invaluable. Things that you've been through, techniques that you've worked through, staying sharp with repetition of watching those over and over and over again are gonna help. I always took really good notes in my classes. I took really good notes. I watched the videos connected to the notes, and then I would apply that in the gym. And if I was overseas, say if I didn't have a training partner, I would visualize. I mean, I can spend hours on the mat just working, okay, these are my heels are in the hips, I'm moving, I'm doing the sweep, I'm moving over, getting knee and belly, going into the mount. Like I can visualize all of those things and not need a dummy there. The other thing is, I said the word dummy, right? Do you have a hawk dummy or a bob dummy or something that you could utilize that will help you get that physical, tactile sensation to be able to get the technique? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. The perfect solution and the A+ answer is having an opponent that's giving you feedback, that's giving you resistance. But if we don't have those things, it shouldn't be an excuse not to get them. And I've done everything that I just mentioned for the last 20 years, when I was in the military and outside of the military traveling. So I think those are just, at least off the top of my head, some of the things I think that can help. And as long as you stick with that, you'll have a level of proficiency and not get super rusty.
And then maybe one last thing to ask, I don't remember how long they were wanting me to go, but with your experience both in martial arts and then also other things and then the teams, is there something that you gain from the teams that you've been able to take over into your martial arts, or anything else that you found is very useful? I'm big on like mindset and approaches, because I feel like that's kind of where everything starts. As you said before, like you just decide you're going to do something and then you figure out ways to make it happen because you've made that decision. Has there been something from the teams that you've been able to carry over to jiu-jitsu, martial arts, or anything else that you're doing?
Yeah, the one thing that I would say, and I'm right there with you, like mindset wise, I spoke to a professional athlete team before one of their big games at one point, and I said, physically, there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do to make you better right this moment, right? There's no weight you can lift, there's nothing you can do, but mentally, I can say one thing that will change the way you think forever. And for me, that one thing that anybody would walk away from this video is that I knew that thinking anything less than my life depended on everything that I did on the mat was not going to help me. So every move, everything that a coach said, every little element, every step, every grab, it's the intensity of knowing that if I don't do that as well as I could, my life could depend on it. And so couldn't the guy next to me. So it's the level of intensity of training that way continually. And I think for me, it's just knowing that, like I said in the beginning, if I'm doing jiu-jitsu, I'm gouging your eyes out, I'm headbutting, I'm kneeing you in the grind, I'm ripping your face, I'm sticking my fingers in your eye. That's happening the whole time, even if I'm not doing it, because I'm thinking that this might be the last time that I ever get to train jiu-jitsu again, but 2 days from now, I could be in a fight for my life that those reps are what saved my life. And so every time I train, it's the same level of intensity applied again and again and again. And I would encourage anybody to think that way, is that if you're going there for the purpose of self-defense and to save your life, is to remember that your life does depend on every single move that you do, and to not brush it off, right? Because we see too many people, they're like, what am I doing here today? And they're just kind of nonchalantly going through the motions. And those are the people that frustrate me the most, because I'm like, you made the decision to be here. I was like, you should be remembering that this is what could save your life. And when that finally clicks and turns on, you see it. And then they're a different person after that. They train differently after that. And that's really what I think, from a mindset perspective, that I would say that I took away from my career, because it was not only a thought, it was a reality, because I had to go on target and use them over and over and over again.
So it's like an intensity of focus then. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I watch a lot of people when they come in, and I can almost tell. I'll go do seminars, I'll do my class, and I can ask people, hey, what were you working on today? And several people will say, oh, I was just kind of here, And then typically it's the best people, like the best students, or the most skill that I see. They'll say, oh, I was working on this, and they can answer it directly because they came in with some sort of focus that they were trying to work on during their training or whatever. And I think that's super important with what we do.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Nick, I appreciate you jumping on, man, and keep up the great work. Obviously, if you're putting out information, you have an obligation and a duty to make sure people are safer. So I appreciate you doing that, man, and God bless you, dude. Thanks for coming on.
Nice chatting with you, brother.
Appreciate your time. Great to have him on. I mean, obviously, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we really can't talk enough about that discipline. That's why it comes up all the time, because it's so invaluable. It's so useful in a combative, in a street scenario. And those are some great questions, even the question at the end about mindset, about how we're applying those things. And from a tactical fitness perspective, you're going to get fitness just by going to do jiu-jitsu. Trust me, if you've never done it before, you're going to walk out of there being like, oh my goodness, to question your whole life. But after repetition, you start to gain a different type of strength that I think is essential for really self-preservation and really dealing with a combative scenario out in town. All right, so great live call. Thanks again, Chewy, for calling in. Let's get to the last part, which is the scenario breakdown, and let's roll it. All right, so this is in Europe. We've got multiple officers with guns drawn, and one of the principles that we just talked about, we're gonna see, I think it was on a previous episode, but look at this guy. He's got his gun out. Of course, I don't know where it went now. I think it went flying across the ground or something. But he was just loosely hanging onto his gun. There was no intentionality about that at all. And the principle that I talked about saying what are the advantages and disadvantages of loading up your hands with either a gun or a firearm, he was sitting there trying to hit or hammer fist. He didn't even really know what he was doing. And what ended up happening, he lost control of his firearm, right? He's dealing with a larger opponent, and that gun very easily could have been grabbed and turned on him and used against him. And that was my concern. I mean, look how loose this is. Not great retention. He's trying to pistol whip the guy on the side of the head. There's no real intentionality with it. He's hyperextended with the gun out, which is in a weak position. I mean, that just sucks from his perspective. It's not something that I would recommend doing. If you are going to have your firearm out, you better be ready to either keep it at serious retention or put it away. If this guy doesn't have a gun out right now and there's no visible threat of a weapon, it's like, what's to say that I couldn't just go hands-on with that guy? If you're not intending to shoot him, if you don't say to yourself, and again, this is where the confidence in knowing jiu-jitsu and knowing good handling, manipulation, and grappling comes into play. If I go to grab onto this guy and I'm not saying to myself, oh, I need to shoot this guy, right? There's already a guy with a gun out. Put my gun away and go wrap this dude up. That way you have both limbs into play to do a good clinch, good side control, take this guy down and get a hold of him. I mean, he's still working the problem. Okay, he's got control of his hips, he goes down, and then finally is able to have some type of side control here, some type of control now, a little bit of sloppy, I don't know, high-centered neon belly, but if he's got help from multiple people, okay, now he's getting in a position to be able to cuff the guy. But that back and forth, think about a scenario where that guy was just on his own. He is literally slapping him with the side of his barrel. That is not what the gun is for. And if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how to fight with your pistol, put it away, because it's going to get used against you. And that was the biggest thing I wanted to show you guys in this scenario. Again, last episode, weapons handling, weapons manipulation, intentionality behind getting that firearm out and deployed. Ultimately, this guy needs better handling with jiu-jitsu and just manipulation of the limbs in general, and then clearly some weapons handling. He was getting overpowered, right here, being pushed around all over the place, and he had no weapons retention. Because his hand was loaded with his pistol, he was tempted to try to go grab the guy on the side of the neck. So that gross motor skill movement kicked in for him, and now his pistol is just completely vulnerable. So something to keep in mind, guys. If you need to go hands-on, and I've thought about this from a home defense perspective, so if you really want to drive this home to you guys at home with a pistol, you might be clearing your house in your boxers, right? or you might even be in your, naked, running around the house with a pistol in your hand. You find the guy and you realize it's somebody that just needs to be wrapped up and really doesn't deserve a bullet, but then you're sitting there with your gun in your hand. What are you gonna do? Just put it down on the counter or shove it in your boxers, or you have no real good place to put it. So you really need to think about that from a perspective of retention, is that what are you gonna do with that now that I need to wrap this guy up? It's something to consider. It's something to have prepared ahead of time so you're not left wondering what to do in a scenario where you need both hands to manipulate somebody else to get them subdued in a position where they're not a threat anymore. So anyway, that was the scenario breakdown. We talked a lot about fitness, how that applies. This guy certainly, it's amazing what a tussle like that will do to your cardio and your physical capability after 60 to 120 seconds. Be prepared. And the way to do that is get in the gym, work out, train, get reps in. Don't wait till that scenario to unfold for you to be prepared to save your life. God bless all you guys. This is Dangerous Questions, the Ironclad original. I'll see you on the next one.